Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the presentation on the Asia 1 region. It's quite a historical presentation, it's quite a historical forum. It's the first time we are having it virtually, thanks to the COVID pandemic. My name is Cherian Thomas, and I'm regional leader for the South Asia Pacific region. This region is geographically the most extensive. It covers a quarter of the Earth's circumference. Hi, Terry.
Nice to see you again, Cherian. It's amazing how we can connect this way, considering there's 2,500 kilometers between Bangkok and Bangalore. It's
That's
amazing. So hi, my name is Terry Ferrari, and I am the regional leader for East Asia, a much more compact area and only 8 countries. But it's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and such an honor, especially to welcome and to be with all the advisory council and board members. And we're so grateful for your service. Let's just talk a little bit about where we are in Asia Pacific, especially since we were last together 3 years ago. So first of all, Asia Pacific has the highest number of vulnerable children. It has the most number of refugees. And we see tremendous disparities between rich and poor, no big surprise. So there's been tremendous economic growth, but at the same time, what we see, children, especially in rural areas, children that are disabled, and some families themselves, big differences between boys and girls. Their stunting levels are quite high. 2 out of 5 children experience stunting. And over 150 million children were out of school even before COVID hit.
And what is so sad is that so much of what we see are caused by human failure. We see problems in our region, for instance, in Myanmar, where the coup has resulted in such a crisis situation. We have the ethnic conflict in Marawi, in Mindanao, in the Philippines. We have the problem with the Rohingya refugees who have moved across from Myanmar, and there are almost 1 million of them in Cox's Bazar. We have so many regions of subnational fragility in each of our countries. And in many of our countries, we find civil society being stifled. There is lack of political freedom, decreasing religious freedom. There are so many challenges that we face. And so many countries in the Asia Pacific region, according to the Fragility State Index, have become so much more fragile. And we have so many more refugees and internally displaced persons in our region.
Yeah. And when we see this, man-made disasters, conflict, combined with a natural disaster like a cyclone or a flood, you see tremendous, it just exacerbates the entire situation. So, Asia Pacific is the most disaster-prone region in the world. And we at World Vision are working very hard to partner with local governments, national governments, communities, especially with children, to build their resilience, and especially in areas of climate change, so that they can be disaster ready, be prepared for those disasters, and when they do hit, to respond. And what we've seen over the years is that we're saving lives, and that's great. But the challenge really is that these climatic disasters that we know are just going to become more frequent. And so we need to work together with governments, of course, to protect the environment, because the families that are going to be hardest hit are the families that we work with.
Yeah, and certainly working with government, working with so many stakeholders, donors, sponsors, peer organizations require very, very complex arrangements. And our own structure of working across both these regions has been complex. We've had a complex structure in place. But so much of that ultimately has worked because of our focus on shared leadership, because of the way in which we are able to communicate with each other. And we see almost $375 million invested for child well-being across the 18 countries in our region. And the good thing is we are seeing an increasing number of institutional donors as well. So almost a third of our funding now comes from institutional donors.
Yeah, you're right, Cherian. I mean, we have been so blessed in so many ways. And in spite of everything, in the last year alone, we impacted as a region over 16 million adults and over 10 million children. So let's take a moment and see how we did that.
Breaking news, Cyclone Fani, the strongest storm in India in 2 decades, hits Orissa this morning.
But even before Tropical Storm Nangka struck this region, hundreds of thousands of families in central Vietnam were struggling to cope.
We have been witnessing extreme climates, natural disasters, and as well as conflicts.
Over the last 3 years, Vanuatu, the most disaster-prone country on Earth, has had one Category 5 cyclone with 3 major volcanic eruptions, countless earthquakes, mini tsunamis, and of course, COVID-19 pandemic.
Flames and panic in the largest refugee camp in the world. More than 1 million Rohingya refugees from Myanmar live in Cox's Bazar.
Since the military coup on February 1st, life for children in Myanmar has become very, very difficult. What started out as a political crisis has very quickly turned into a humanitarian crisis.
As the country was preparing to celebrate its Independence Day celebrations, bomb blasts rocked the city yet again.
In the last 3 years, World Vision India's resilience has been tested as India faced some of the natural disasters.
Howling winds reached 185 kilometers per hour. Off roofs, uprooted trees, and lives.
Sometimes our staff need to travel hundreds of kilometers to reach out, programming children and families. Also, we have very unique disasters like the harsh winter. We call it Zod.
Since 2018 till now, we would have reached about 20 million people around this region with humanitarian aid.
Our staff are motivated by their faith and by their commitment to the communities.
When people are faced with challenges, they're also ready for change.
Our children and young people were given safe space where they can engage in meaningful conversations with people who can help them.
In the last 3 years, 2 million people, including more than 994,000 children, were supported on health and nutrition. Our WASH programs reach over 2.8 million, including 1.6 million children. Over 1.2 million people were also supported on livelihood.
We serve joyfully despite all these disasters.
I'm so proud of my team because my teams have love, commitment, heart to serve the most vulnerable children and families.
Yes, indeed, there is considerable adversity in our region. And we've had some of the biggest natural disasters, and many of them occurring simultaneously. And all this has made work in this region so much more complex and difficult in the last few years.
Yeah, you name it, we've had it. But at the same time, we've served incredibly joyfully. It's been so inspiring to see what we've done over the past years, the number of emergencies we've been able to respond to.
And now we are in the middle of COVID. That's the big elephant in the room. It started in China, in East Asia. And I still remember how you had set up the crisis management team for East Asia and how gradually it spread into South Asia Pacific. And what started as a health problem also became an economic problem. And the problem is far from over. We are continuing to face it. It's 18 months and it's still far from resolution. We have a long way to go. We have never faced such a bad crisis in the last 100 years. And certainly since World Vision has been operating, it's the worst pandemic, the worst crisis that we faced. And many of our offices work under very severe restrictions. They are subject to lockdowns. They've had to readjust their programming models so that they can use very basic elementary digital technology to connect with people. And sometimes these periods of long remote operations has its own toll on our staff.
With over 7,300 staff working in 18 countries, it's no big surprise that we have been impacted personally through COVID-19. Every single national office has had a number of staff members become ill. In Myanmar right now, somewhere between 20 to 25% of our staff are ill. I know India was tremendously devastated. And not only did we have staff pass away, but we even had a couple board members as well, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's really been devastating. And it's no big surprise. We did a survey in the region on kind of a mental health, checkpoint with staff. And many were reporting that they were experiencing stress at work. And we would expect to see that even more now as this COVID is continuing to get worse and worse.
Yeah, it's only got worse, and we should do that survey now, along with so many of the other surveys that we started during this period. You still remember last year when we first did the unmasking, the impact of COVID, the unmasking study for Asia. We saw the impact that it had on so many areas and so many facets of our communities. What started really as a study to help us to plan our programming better and to bring in corrections to our programming, to inform our programming, actually became something that was so useful and so relevant. And we found that when we shared it with stakeholders, governments, with multilateral agencies, with the UN, they were so interested. And we had a webinar last year at almost the same time to talk about the impact of COVID in our region. And we found livelihoods are a big challenge, and reduction in income because of livelihoods percolating and affecting the way people live, and particularly children, with health, access to health and nutrition being affected, with their education coming under very, very severe strain. So many children, almost 2/3 of them, are out of school. And these are challenges that we'll have to overcome as we move along.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, I think we all feel that COVID has made our world almost unrecognizable. But what it hasn't changed is our resolve and our commitment to vulnerable children. So let's take a minute and watch what we've done working with children and staff.
It was the most stressful time of my life. Lockdown, daytime, nighttime, weekday, weekend, all felt the same. It was hard to focus while my world was crashing down. Afterwards, locals said to us, "You didn't leave when hard time came. You stayed and experienced what we experienced."
COVID-19 first hit us almost a year and a half ago. As it started spreading, it came very close to many of us, affecting the lives of staff and their families.
I hear that you have some personal experience of this terrible disease too.
We were helping out a colleague find a bed here in Patna. He works in a remote location, in a tribal location, and we shifted him here. And right as I was working on that, my father turned out to be positive. And my mother at the same time was positive, and she was being treated at home. The hospital ran out of oxygen, and my dad and both my colleague, both of them went to be with the Lord.
We see rising rates of early child marriage, family violence, teenage pregnancy, child labour, and of course school dropouts.
Nesa corona ខ្ញុំអត់បានទៅរៀនទេខ្ញុំអត់សុខខ្ញុំចង់លេងមួយមិត្តភ័ក្តិតែអត់ចង់ទៅស្គាល់តែэнэ дэлхийд байгаа манай Монголд байгаа хүмүүс тэгээд хүүхдүүдийг алдахгүй гэж байна.
मेरो बुबा आउन सक्नुहुन्न किनभने उहाँको आर्थिक कमजोरी भयो.
Isa rin sa kinakatakot ko kasi meron akong 80 years old na lola na nagpapadasal sa mga patay at lagi siyang umaalis. Feeling ko vulnerable siya sa sakit na yun. Siyempre, mahina na rin ang immune system niya.
I'm so humbled to see the commitment, the courage, and the faith of our staff to go above and beyond in keeping up with our promise to serve the most vulnerable children.
And even amidst these challenges, we have achieved amazing things. We're building an evidence base and we're responding and being informed by the information and the input that we hear.
We as an organization have faced many challenges in the past and we have overcome them. And this one we will overcome too.
We've delivered on services to more than 7 million children. Even just the cash and voucher assistance has reached more than 1.43 million people. Nonetheless, we stand in solidarity as one team across the Asia Pacific region. We're committed to partnerships, we're committed to building our evidence base, and we're committing to put the most vulnerable children first.
With Christ, we can do all things, and He is the one who strengthens us.
So whether they are children or whether they are staff, what we see is resilience. What we see is joyfulness, despite pain, despite exclusion, despite suffering. But we really need to work hard to make sure that this doesn't continue forever. What is very clear is that what contributes to this joyfulness and resilience, certainly for our staff, is our faith. Our walk with Christ, which is so foundational to our work, has helped us deal with these issues. And praying together as teams, and we do that in our region, as you know, every Monday, every Thursday. And we find that we are able to get almost all the staff to come in. Our virtual day of prayer, which we had last year, was indeed so well attended, and people from field offices also participated. In our initial prayer vigil that we had on COVID, we had over 500 people participate. We had big turnouts for the vigils for Myanmar. And whenever there are challenges and difficulties, this ability to turn to God in prayer gives us a strength. And I think that is something that will keep us going.
And I know it was tremendously helpful for the staff in Myanmar to be able to participate and to hear the prayers of, Andrew Morley and JBK and others, just being with them in that moment. And so it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience for all. Very, very, very encouraging. And so, the question is, where do we go from here? What is the future of what we're looking at? And we just know there's just tremendous challenges. So in many countries, children have been out of school for over a year. And in many cases, those children have been unable to connect virtually as well. So they've lost a year of schooling. And so the question is, what's going to happen to these kids? And what's going to happen to the parents? In many cases, we work with families that are they exist in the informal market. And so they have experienced tremendous losses in income. We saw that in our impact study. Something like over 70% said that their salaries their daily income had been affected by COVID-19, and that affected their food insecurity. So the question is, where do we go from here?
Yeah, and as we look at the future, what is very critical for us is to recognize the fact that a lot of the work that we have done in the past 2 decades have been undone in the last 2 years. So many million more people have moved back into poverty. I've seen a recent study talking about how at least 30 million people have been pulled back from the middle class back into being below the poverty line. And therefore being able to readjust our programs, readjust a lot of what we are doing, taking into account COVID and factoring in COVID into our programming and into our strategy is what we will continue to do as we go along. We would continue to have to do it knowing that we will sometimes face multiple disasters along with COVID. We also will continue to face the impact of climate change, and we are seeing this summer how devastating the impact of climate change is across the world, and the Asia Pacific region faces the brunt of it. We will see continuing restrictions in terms of our own faith identity, in terms of religious freedom, in terms of political freedom, in terms of the way civil society can engage. And that will continue to be a challenge for us as we move along. And I really do hope that we will find the resources, we'll find the imagination, we'll find the innovation, and more importantly, also the right kind of sometimes technology to make sure that the poor are not left behind.
Jaron, you've made some excellent points. I mean, the challenges are quite daunting. I mean, we were sharing that World Bank report that came out in January that somewhere between 119 to 124 million people have fallen back into poverty, and 60% of those are in Southeast Asia. And we have to respond, right? So it's going to take tremendous agility. It's going to take innovation. It's going to take creativity. But more than anything, it's going to take unity and trust. Now, we have to remember that when COVID hit back in January 2020, at first we didn't know what we were up against. And our first response was to say, this isn't something that we do. It isn't a core competency. But we responded because we knew we had to. And so
we had to reinvent
we
so many
responded
things along the way.
because we did. And God was there, right?
Yeah,
so God was
He's
there,
there
so
in-
we had to be there. He was there before we were. So the question is, how do we come together? How do we nurture new relationships across with faith-based partners where they exist, with governments, both at the national level and the local level, with new donors, corporates, wealthy individuals who have God has placed in the heart to need to respond. And we're going to be able to do that through the evidence that we're generating in our programs. And we have so many more tools available to us now than we used to be able to communicate that well and to partner with SOs and with the partnership to be able to tell that story. So I hope you've enjoyed this time together and to learn a little bit more about what we're doing in Asia Pacific. And we're going to open up the mic now to give us 10 minutes to answer any questions that you may have. But thank you.
Yeah, and we certainly have enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun.